When my parents uninvited me and my kids from Thanksgiving, calling us losers, years of quiet resentment finally boiled over. As family dramas spiraled and secrets surfaced, I took a stand that changed everything. But when a sudden crisis hit, I had to make a choice that could redefine my family's future. Thanksgiving at my parents' house had always been a mixed bag. Sure, the house would be warm, filled with the smell of turkey and cinnamon, but beneath all that, there was this sharp edge. It was the kind of edge you only feel with family, the little jabs, the quiet comparisons, the unspoken hierarchy. At the top, always, was my sister Emily and her picture-perfect family. And then there was me, Rob, and my kids, apparently. The other family, the ones who didn't quite fit the mold. I'd learned to live with it. For years I bit my tongue, smiled through the discomfort, and told myself it was better to keep the peace. My parents had always favored Emily. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Her kids were practically perfect in their eyes, showered with gifts and love, while mine got the occasional, "Oh, they're getting so big," before my mum would shift her attention back to Emily's youngest, showing off her latest trophy. Every Thanksgiving followed the same script. I'd get the group text from my mom, something sweet and generic. "Can't wait to see everyone. Let me know what you're bringing." And I'd reply with something equally polite, filling in whatever gap was left in the menu, trying to make myself useful. This year started no differently. I even allowed myself a bit of hope. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe for once I wouldn't feel like the odd one out. But that hope evaporated the moment my dad called. He had this tone, you know? That serious dad tone that made me feel like a kid again, waiting to get scolded. "Rob," he started, "your mum and I have been talking." I could feel my stomach twist. "We've been talking with Emily, and we think it would be best if you and the kids didn't come this year." "Best?" I asked, my voice already faltering. He didn't soften it, didn't even try. "Your sister's children shouldn't have to see losers like you and your kids at Thanksgiving. It's not fair to them." "Losers?" I stood there, phone pressed to my ear as that word hung in the air. It was like something inside me just snapped. Years of being the afterthought, of being the reliable son who always helped out, of putting up with their thinly veiled disdain. It all just boiled over. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just said, "Okay, Dad. You know what? No losers at Thanksgiving, and no more of my money either." The silence that followed was louder than any shouting match. For a split second I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd realize what he'd said. But instead he launched into a tirade about respect, about family loyalty, about how selfish I was being. But for once, I didn't listen. I didn't cave. I hung up, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I knew the fallout would come. It always did. I barely had time to catch my breath before my phone started buzzing. It was Emily, of course. "What did you say to Dad?" she demanded in her first message. "Mom is so upset." I stared at the screen, the anger simmering just below the surface. I wasn't going to play this game, not again. "I told him we wouldn't be at Thanksgiving," I replied. "I'm just respecting his wishes." Her response came almost immediately. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, you know," I typed, my fingers moving fast over the screen. "Dad said he didn't want losers like me and my kids there, didn't want us ruining your perfect holiday." The dots danced on the screen, and I could almost see her sitting there, probably in her spotless kitchen, her perfect life momentarily thrown off balance. When she finally responded, her tone had changed. "He didn't mean it like that." I couldn't help myself. Sure sounded like he did, but hey, maybe I misheard. Maybe he said loaders instead of losers. You know, like we load too much holiday cheer. She didn't take the bait. "This is serious, Rob. It's Thanksgiving. Family is supposed to be together." I couldn't believe what I was reading. "You're right," I wrote back. "But when I'm with family, I'd like to feel like I'm actually part of it, not like some outsider who's barely tolerated." She tried a different angle, her messages shifting from defensive to accusatory. "You can't just not come. What about Mom? She's devastated." "Maybe Dad should have thought of that before he called me a loser," I said. "And while we're at it, let them know they won't be getting any more financial help from me either." That one hit hard. I could tell. She didn't respond right away, And when she did, it was all caps and exclamation points. But I didn't care. I was done. For the second time that day, I hung up, this time on my sister. And as the silence settled around me, I knew there was no going back. But I didn't want to. Not anymore. After I hung up on Emily, I braced myself for what I knew was coming next. It didn't take long. My phone started buzzing with texts from my mom. They were exactly what I expected. Long, winding messages packed with disappointment and guilt. She started with the classics. Family should always stick together. Thanksgiving is about forgiveness and love. She even tried to spin my dad's outburst as a harmless slip. Your father didn't mean it that way, she wrote. He's getting older, Rob. You know how he is. Sometimes he doesn't. Say things the right way. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Sure, because your kids are losers is just one of those cute little senior moments, right? I'd seen this play before. My parents had a way of rewriting history to suit their narrative. I was supposed to swallow my pride, apologize for daring to stand up for myself, and then we'd all pretend nothing happened. Not this time. I let the texts pile up, my phone buzzing every few minutes with another paragraph of carefully crafted guilt. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on my kids. I asked them what they wanted to do for Thanksgiving, and their faces lit up at the thought of a day without the usual chaos. They wanted to make pancakes and stay in their pajamas. They wanted to watch movies and play games. So that's exactly what we did. Thanksgiving morning was a revelation. Instead of the usual stress, there was calm. My kids and I stayed in our pajamas, blasting holiday music as we whipped up breakfast. The kitchen became a battlefield of flour and syrup, with chocolate chips scattered across the floor. My son attempted to flip a pancake and half of it ended up on the ceiling. Normally I might have groaned, but instead I laughed until my stomach hurt. We had pancakes for breakfast, lunch and possibly dinner too. My daughter declared it the best Thanksgiving ever, and I couldn't help but agree. There was no pressure, no judgment, no thinly veiled criticism, just us being ourselves. We watched our favorite movies, the kind that my parents would roll their eyes at. We played board games, and when the afternoon sun peeked through the clouds, we went for a walk in the park. The kids jumped into piles of leaves, their laughter echoing through the crisp air. It was simple, but it felt right. As the day wound down and the kids drifted off to sleep, I sat on the couch with a cup of tea. I let the silence settle around me, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't suffocating. It was peaceful. I realized then that I wasn't a loser. Not by a long shot. I was a dad, a good dad, and that was more than enough. The peace didn't last. It never does. As I sat there soaking in the quiet, my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, but the preview of the text stopped me cold. Your father, hospital, chest pains. My heart did this weird flip. It didn't matter how angry I was or how deep the wounds ran. This was still my dad. And in that moment, everything else fell away. The resentment, the hurt, the anger, it all got swallowed up by a rush of fear. I fumbled for my phone, typing back, "Which hospital?" My fingers felt numb. I knew that answering this call might pull me back into the chaos I'd just escaped, but I couldn't walk away. Not from this. I called a neighbor to watch the kids, threw on some clothes, and headed out. The drive to the hospital felt like it took forever. My mind was racing. Was this serious? Would I even get there in time? And if I did, what would I say? When I finally got to the hospital, everything felt too bright, too cold. I found my mom in the waiting room, her face etched with worry. Emily was there too, and for once she didn't look so perfect. She looked tired, scared. I didn't say anything, just nodded and took the empty chair beside my mom. The hours dragged on. Nurses came and went, and the doctor finally told us it wasn't a heart attack, just a scare. They'd keep him overnight for observation. Relief mixed with exhaustion, and none of us really knew what to say. Eventually, they let us see him. He was propped up in bed, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. The man who had always towered over me, who always had the final word, now looked fragile. It did something to me, seeing him like that. Stripped of his bluster, his authority, he was just human. "Rob?" His voice was rough, and I could see him struggling to find the words. Part of me wanted to make it easy for him, to step in and fill the silence, but I didn't. I needed him to say it, whatever it was. "I didn't mean what I said," he finally managed. I let the words hang in the air. "Yeah, you did," I said, not with anger, but with a kind of exhausted honesty. "And maybe you didn't mean for it to hurt, but it did." He closed his eyes, and for a moment I thought that was it, that he'd just retreat behind his walls. But then he spoke again, softer this time. "I always wanted you to be more." "You know? More like Emily?" I asked. The words slipped out, sharp and unfiltered. He winced. "Not exactly, just more secure. I thought if I pushed you, you'd do better, be happier." "Well, it didn't work," I said. "All it did was make me feel like nothing I did was ever good enough, and I won't let my kids feel that way." My mom reached for his hand, her own eyes wet. "We've made mistakes," she said. "We didn't mean to push you away." I wanted to believe her. Part of me did. But I knew this wasn't something a single conversation could fix. There was too much history, too many layers of hurt. "I'm here now," I said. "But things have to change. If you want me and the kids in your life, it can't be like it was." They both nodded. It wasn't a promise, not really, but it was a start. When my dad was finally discharged from the hospital, I didn't rush over. I needed time to process everything, the anger, the hurt, the tiny spark of hope from our conversation. I wanted to believe that things could change, but experience had taught me not to expect miracles. Instead of falling back into old habits, I focused on my own little family. My kids and I continued building our own traditions. We started a weekly movie night, complete with popcorn and whatever ridiculous snacks the kids could dream up. We turned Saturdays into adventure days, exploring new parks, trying new foods, and just being together without the weight of expectation. The holidays loomed closer, and I knew Christmas would be the real test. Usually it was another round of being the outcast at my parents' house, watching Emily's kids unwrap mountains of presents, while mine got a polite card with a gift card tucked inside. This year, I decided it would be different. I told my parents they were welcome to visit us, but I wouldn't be bringing the kids over. I made it clear. No backhanded comments, no comparisons, no loser talk. My mum was hesitant, but I could hear something else in her voice. Relief, maybe. Emily didn't take it as well. She called, her voice tight, asking if I was really going to ruin Christmas for everyone. I told her I wasn't ruining anything. I was just choosing peace for myself and my kids. To my surprise, they came. My parents showed up at my door, a little awkward, but they were there. My dad even carried a box of gifts. Nothing extravagant, but thoughtful things, puzzles, art supplies, books. My kids' faces lit up, and for a moment, I thought I might cry. Emily didn't come, but I was okay with that. I wasn't ready to face her, and maybe she wasn't ready to face me. But for the first time, it felt like my parents were actually seeing me, seeing my kids. Not as the lesser family, not as the backdrop to Emily's perfect life, but as their own people, worthy of love and attention. After Christmas, things weren't magically perfect, but there was a shift. My dad called every now and then, not to lecture me or ask for help, but just to talk. My mum sent texts, little updates on her day, pictures of recipes she wanted to try. It was strange, almost like we were getting to know each other for the first time. Emily, on the other hand, kept her distance. I think in a way my stepping back disrupted the whole balance of the family. She had always been the center of attention, and now that my parents weren't leaning on me financially, she felt the strain. I heard through the grapevine that she was struggling, that her perfect life had a few cracks. I didn't take pleasure in it, but I also didn't rush to fix it. It wasn't my job. The hardest part was keeping those boundaries firm. When my parents subtly hinted at needing help with a bill, or when my mom mentioned how hard things were for Emily, I stayed strong. I wasn't their safety net anymore. I had my own family to take care of, and I wasn't going to let guilt pull me back into that old role. It wasn't easy. There were days I felt selfish, days I wondered if I was doing the right thing. But then I'd look at my kids, at how much happier they seemed, how our home felt lighter and I knew I was on the right path. As spring turned into summer, my family found its rhythm. My parents started visiting more often, not just for holidays, but on random weekends. They brought groceries sometimes or little treats for the kids. My dad even helped fix a leaky faucet without making a single comment about my career choices. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when old habits crept in, a comment that stung, a glance that lingered too long. But those moments were fewer, and when they happened, I didn't let them slide. I spoke up, gently but firmly, and to my surprise, my parents listened. Emily remained distant. Occasionally, she'd send a message, usually something superficial. I didn't push it. I had learned that not every relationship could be healed, at least not right away. Maybe, in time, she'd come around. Maybe not. I couldn't control that. What I could control was how I responded, and I chose peace. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch watching my kids play, my dad joined me. He was quiet for a long time, just sipping his coffee and looking out at the yard. Finally, he spoke. "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm proud of you." His voice was rough, like the words had to scrape their way out. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to make sure I'd heard him right. Proud of me? For what? For standing up for yourself, for your kids. He took a breath, the kind that seemed to reach all the way down. I was wrong. We were wrong. I thought pushing you would make you stronger, but all it did was push you away. There it was, an apology. Not perfect, not polished, but real. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. We sat in that quiet, letting the words settle, and for the first time, I felt like we were truly on the same page. Forgiveness didn't come, all at once. It wasn't a switch that flipped, but more like a steady drip, filling up the empty spaces bit by bit. I didn't forget the hurt, but I allowed myself to move past it. I let myself see the good moments, the small steps my parents were taking to bridge the gap. And slowly, that gap began to close. Not long after Christmas, I sat down with my kids to explain why things had been so different with their grandparents and Aunt Emily. They were smart. They'd picked up on the tension, even if they hadn't said anything. I wanted them to understand, but I also didn't want to drag them into the mess of adult issues. We sat around the kitchen table, the same one where we'd eaten our Thanksgiving pancakes, and I did my best to keep it simple. "You know how sometimes people say things that aren't nice?" I started, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea. Well, Grandpa said something hurtful, and I had to make sure we were treated with respect. "That's why we didn't go to Thanksgiving." My son, ever the practical one, asked, "Did Grandpa say sorry?" "He did," I said, nodding, "and I think he's trying to do better. It might take time, but I'm hopeful." My daughter, her face serious, asked the question that had been hanging in the air. "Are we going to see them again?" "Yeah, sweetheart," I said, reaching across the table to hold her hand. "We are, but we're going to do it our way. We're going to make sure it feels good for us too." It wasn't a perfect conversation, but it was an honest one, and that was the best I could offer. Over the next few months, my parents continued to show up. They didn't just come for the big occasions, they came for ordinary days too. My mom would pop by with a basket of muffins, my dad with tools to fix whatever had broken around the house. It was strange, almost surreal to have them in my home on my terms. I set boundaries, and to my surprise, they respected them. My dad didn't comment on my job, didn't ask why I hadn't done better for myself. My mom didn't compare my kids to Emily's. They seemed to understand, maybe for the first time, that they were guests in my life, not directors of it. One afternoon, my dad sat with me on the back porch while the kids played. He didn't say much, just sipped his coffee and watched. Eventually, he cleared his throat. "I've been talking to someone," he said. "A counselor." I nearly dropped my mug. "Really?" "Yeah," he nodded, his eyes still on the yard. "I thought it might help. I needed to figure out why I say the things I say, why I pushed you so hard." A mix of emotions rushed through me, relief, disbelief, even a little bit of anger that it had taken this long. But mostly, I felt hope. That's really good, Dad." "It's hard," he admitted, his voice low. But I want to do better. For you, for the kids. For the first time in a long time, I believed him. Just when things seemed to be settling, I got a message from Emily. It was short and to the point. Can we talk? I wasn't sure if I was ready. Our relationship had always been complicated. She had been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, and I had spent my life trying to measure up to an impossible standard, but I also knew that avoiding her wouldn't help. If my parents could make changes, maybe she could too. We met at a coffee shop. She looked different, tired, a little worn down. She didn't waste time with small talk. "I'm sorry," she said, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "I didn't realize how hard it was for you. I never saw it." Her honesty caught me off guard. "It wasn't just you," I said. "It was all of us, but yeah, it hurt." We talked for hours, about our childhood, about the roles we'd been forced into without realizing it, about how my stepping back had shaken things up for her. She admitted that without my financial support things had been tough, that she and Tom had had to make real changes. "But that's not why I'm here," she said quickly. "I'm not asking for anything. I miss my brother." I let her words sink in. I missed her too. Beneath all the layers of competition and expectation, there had always been love. It had just gotten buried along the way. By the time summer rolled around, things felt different in a good way. My parents were a regular part of our lives, but they came without the weight of old expectations. Emily started visiting too, bringing her kids over for playdates that didn't feel like competitions. We built new traditions. Instead of the pressure cooker holidays at my parents' house, we had casual barbecues in my backyard. My dad would man the grill, my mom would fuss over the salad, and the kids would run wild, laughing and playing. There were no perfectly curated moments, no silent battles for approval, just family. On one of those lazy afternoons, as the sun started to set, my dad pulled me aside. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice steady. "Not just for what you've done, but for who you are. I'm proud of the man you've become." For so long I had craved those words, and now that they were here, they felt like a gift, a real one, not the kind wrapped in obligation or guilt. A year after that fateful Thanksgiving, I found myself hosting it. My house, my rules, my family. My parents were there, Emily too, along with her kids and Tom. We crowded around the table, the food a little mismatched, the turkey slightly overcooked, but none of it mattered. We shared stories, laughter, and maybe a few too many desserts. My dad offered a toast, his voice catching just a bit. "To family," he said, "to forgiveness, and to never calling each other losers again." The table erupted in laughter, for even my mom cracking a smile. And as I looked around, I realized that the weight I had carried for so long was finally gone. I wasn't trying to fit into their version of a family anymore. I had built my own, right here, around this imperfect table surrounded by love, and for the first time it felt exactly like it should.